and it would take a year and a half to try the case. First of all, it would have to be broken down into 3 different trials. You couldn't try everybody together. And so you're talking about a 3 to 4 year undertaking costing Fulton County millions and millions and millions of dollars, much of which was going to go to her boyfriend, because she, instead of relying on the paid salaried employees in her office, she hires her boyfriend at a $350 or $400 hourly rate. Some of that money ends up being used for vacations for the two of them. She's lucky she won't be indicted when this is all over. She could have brought a simple, ordinary conspiracy case. It would have taken 3 months to prepare. It would have taken maybe a month to try. It would all be over. It would not cost the county millions and millions of dollars. It wouldn't have enriched her boyfriend. It wouldn't have paid for the vacations. As I said, she'll be lucky if she gets out of this thing without being indicted. The trial judge said that one of the two of them, either she or Wade, would have to resign from the case. She let him. She sacrificed him so she could stay on the case. And we appealed that. We're going to win that appeal. There's no way, if he has to get out, she doesn't get out. And as I said, I think that there is borderline criminal activity the way the money was handled in this case. So I expect that there's going to be a new prosecutor appointed, and I believe we will be able to convince a new prosecutor to withdraw the indictment, at least against John Eastman, for a lot of the reasons that I have already expressed.
Destiny, thoughts there?
I've only been following the closest case to follow are the federal ones, and so I've read the Georgia indictment, but I haven't followed the personal life to try to discredit the entire case based on what we think about her hiring whoever she does for the investigations or for the prosecution.
Mind you, I'm not discrediting her. I'm telling you the trial judge has done this. He was appalled.
Okay.
Well, what do we think about the idea that Trump asked Georgia? He said, hey, can you find the votes? I mean, Destiny, what do you think about that?
I mean, obviously, it was an egregious overstepping of the boundaries when he called the election investigator. That was a horrendously inappropriate call when he was trying to bully and harass Secretary of State. Was Raffensperger's role, right? Secretary of State, I think, and then to try to get them to, to convince them of 50 million different lies about voter fraud. That whole phone call was unbelievably unacceptable. Yeah, the thinly veiled threats of like, this is illegal and you guys know you're engaging in criminal activity was just ridiculous. It's completely.
What do you think? Can I respond?
Yeah, please respond. Yeah.
Okay. There was nothing wrong with that phone call because he didn't put a gun to anybody's head. He said, can you find the votes? Tell me what's criminal about asking that question.
When the person that's the head of the executive branch, which has the Department of Justice underneath it, is accusing you of knowingly facilitating crimes, I think that almost every reasonable human being would interpret that as some type of threat.
Well, I'm sorry, you're wrong about that.
Okay.
Because most reasonable lawyers would agree with me, not you.
Why is that?
Because there were no threats made. There was a question asked, and the mere fact that commentators think the question was unreasonable doesn't mean it's a crime.
What do you think about that, Destiny? I mean, what Harvey's saying is that you can say,
I don't know if that act in and of itself, that phone call in and of itself was a crime. I didn't say any of it was a crime. I said it was wholly inappropriate. I think that it might go towards the conspiracy, the obstructing our rights from the Jack Smith case. I think that it might go towards that. But in and of itself, I would just say it was disgusting and wholly inappropriate. I think it was a thinly veiled threat. But I don't know if any of that hour phone call was criminal or not.
It's not.
So Destiny, you don't think Trump tried to steal the election in Georgia?
Yeah, he absolutely did, of course. But there's not a crime for stealing an election, or there's not a crime for trying to get somebody, a state legislature, to flip their vote. I don't think that's a criminal activity.
You keep saying it's not a crime to steal it. It is a crime to steal an election. It is not a crime to come up with a far-out interpretation in an attempt to win an election. You know, the abuse of language in this whole thing has been horrendous. The use of language assumes a conclusion.
I mean, there's always a conclusion assumed to some extent in a court case. An indictment isn't brought, with, in neutrality. Obviously, there's going to be an assumed, I think this person's committed a crime, right? The whole reason why a prosecution brings criminal charges to somebody is if they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, or at least get a plea out of it, right?
You know how easy it is to get an indictment from a grand jury?
What reasonable suspicion is the
the number of times that a grand jury has not followed a prosecutor's advice to indict somebody can be counted on one hand of fingers of one hand.
Wait, what? So what do you think that means?
That means that if a prosecutor wants to indict you, the prosecutor can get the grand jury to indict you.
You don't think you're putting the cart before the horse there?
Just a second. You know how the grand jury works? 23 members of the community are in a room. The defense lawyer does not show up. Only the prosecutor shows up to address them. I won a case in which a grand jury refused to indict my client because I made a motion to the judge, who's in charge of the grand jury, for the right to show up in front of the grand jury in order to tell them why I thought the prosecutor was wrong and asked them to indict my client. The prosecutor objected vehemently. The judge said I could do that. I showed up. It was my only time I appeared before a grand jury, and my client was not indicted because it was the exceptional case where both sides were presented to the grand jury, where grand juries get only the prosecutor's side. That's why the saying is that it was the Attorney General, Robert Jackson, before he got on the Supreme Court, who said, a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. That's a very famous quote from somebody who ended up on the Supreme Court. These grand juries will indict a ham sandwich.
And your evidence for that is because the majority of indictments are made when a prosecutor goes to a grand jury looking for an indictment, right?
I've been practicing criminal law for 60 years, and I think I can count on my fingers the number of cases in which a grand jury has refused to indict when a prosecutor is recommended.
Okay. Do you think that might be because if a prosecutor is going to a grand jury, they're not trying, first of all, for an indictment for a grand jury, we're only looking for probable cause, right? For an indictment?
Correct.
Okay. But you're not bringing an indictment if you think you can only prove probable cause, right? Aren't you doing it because you think you can convict in front of a jury beyond reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard? Wouldn't that explain more why 95% plus of federal cases aren't just brought on indictment but are ended up being convicted or plead? Like, doesn't that show that there's probably
I think that the prosecutors made an assumption that with the assistance of an ignorant and compliant press, the media, they probably could influence the grand jurors as well as the trial jurors.
Why do you think that the vast majority of federal cases end in conviction if the indictment process is so easy? Wouldn't the indictment, if you could just indict a ham sandwich, wouldn't you expect the conviction rate to be so much lower?
For the most part, prosecutors are ethical. They only bring charges where they think they can prove them beyond a reasonable doubt and where their legal theories are correct. In this Trump era, there is a kind of national insanity going on. We haven't been able to think straight. Trump has been such a divisive figure. And by the way, I'm not announcing any support for Trump. I have made no public statement whether I support him. I have my personal views, but I don't mention them. I have a client here, and so I'm not mentioning my personal views about Donald Trump. But I'm saying that the news media have been on a jihad, and they have been collaborating with prosecutors, and unfortunately, defense lawyers have not spent enough time talking to the press, explaining some of these things.
Okay, so firstly, thank you. Then it's not just random indictments are made. Most prosecutors are making indictments that they think they can prove in court beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's not just that all indictments are easy to get. It's that they're probably only bringing indictments that they think they can win in front of a jury. I agree with that. But then the second part here is you're saying that these are just like Trump derangement syndrome is essentially what you're accusing people of having. There were 4 major criminal cases, before it was federal court and then New York and Georgia. The New York one ended with convictions. We've got 3 other cases. Where's the evidence, or why do we think that these cases are being brought improperly if the only one that's gone fully through the process and has been in front of a jury, Trump has been convicted on. It seems to be the case.
Well, the case you're talking about, the case in New York State Court.
Yep.
What's the relationship between that and the federal case against Eastman? They're wholly different animals.
Well, sure, but you made it sound like the case is all against like Trump and I guess the people around Trump are just being dumb because of.
I'm only talking about the cases in which my client is a co-defendant.
Okay. And you think that those cases are unfair right now because, well, I guess going back to our first topic, do you think it's just offering legal
not only
advice? Okay.
they're unsound. Forget about unfair. They're unsound legally.
When you say unsound, or well, we can go, yeah. Where do you want to go, Jake?
They're based on flawed legal theories applied to facts that are contested.
Quick time check. Do you guys both have a hard stop in 15 minutes?
I'm good for whatever.
Harvey, are we pissing you off too much, or how
I'm
much
not
do you got?
pissed off at all. I'm incredulous at the ignorance shown about the law here.
Wait, hold on, wait, I gotta ask. Wait, what ignorance? What am I not understanding? Help me. You got access to a huge audience right now. There's a lot of people who's gonna see this. Help me, because I come down very squarely onto the other side.
What you don't understand is the line between good faith and bad faith interpretation of complicated laws.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe I'm being presumptuous. I don't see what's complicated about the ECA and the 12th Amendment and what Eastman was advising Trump to do. I do agree there are complicated laws. I read through the Chevron case and the example cited. There's very, very complicated stuff for sure. But the ECA, the Eastman stuff, the 12th Amendment, none of this seems that complicated.
So Harvey, help us.
Do you realize the shock that the news media was in when Chevron was reversed by the Supreme Court?
I'm not here to defend the news media. The news media is crazy. I agree with you. People make a lot of stupid comments in the media.
I think
about
Harvey's
laws
point
like
is that sometimes we think. Sorry, let me not make your point for you. Sorry, yeah. I think what you're saying is that in that case we thought that the law was a sure thing.
No, I agree, and I agree with Harvey. Media says a lot of really stupid things. I think the Chevron case, especially Gorsuch's concurrence, I thought was written really well. I came into that thinking it was going to be stupid. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah,
so what do you make of this? Does Harvey have a point? Like
no,
the
because it's
case,
appeal. Well, okay, because I'm asking for a bit more respect, and that's fine. I understand because I'm a legal idiot, and I understand that. But I've read through a lot of these cases, and I'm not just trying to be the media where I'm saying like, oh, all of this is so horrible and so bad. I think I can at least read the writing. I've gone through the relevant portions of the ECA. I've gone through the 2 different memos that Eastman had written. I've gone through Chesebro's original suggestions, and I've gone through how they were going to apply that to the 12th Amendment, and I've gone through the depositions of Short and Jacobs and everybody in talking about this. Nothing about this seems complicated. And I feel like what we're doing is we're playing this game. It's like, well, sometimes law is complicated. Sometimes it is. I don't think it is here. I think it's very simple. What's going on here?
What is destiny?
What am I missing? Yeah.
What you're missing is the fact that the law is not as simple as you think it is.
In what way, in this case?
Well, we've been through this a million times. I have an interpretation that I believe is reasonable. Destiny has an interpretation he thinks is reasonable.
Yeah. Why don't you think Harvard's interpretation is reasonable?
Hold on, it's going to be up to the courts to decide. Yeah. I think that Eastman's interpretation was reasonable. It'll be up to a court to decide, and I predict we're going to win that.
And then Supreme Court immunity, Destiny, is that something you wanted to touch on, or?
Yeah, if you want to, yeah. I haven't heard a great defense of the immunity ruling for Trump. This doesn't impact Eastman's case at all, but, well, actually, that's not true. I guess it could end up impacting Eastman's case, but.
I am not opining on Trump's guilt.
Okay.
I'm not defending his guilt.
Okay, fine. So, it's funny that we're arguing so much about this because Destiny and Harvey, you guys have more in common than you have different, I think. Both of you are advocates for free speech. Both of you have an impressive track record at challenging censorship successfully, and both of you care about civil liberties. So Harvey Silverglade is not only the lawyer for John Eastman, but Harvey Silverglade, you're the co-founder of FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, an organization that defends free speech on college campuses and fights broader civil rights. And
fights for broader civil rights.
What did I say?
You said fight civil rights.
Well,
Fight
fights
for
for.
civil rights, right?
I'm tired, man.
No,
I
you're
gotta,
good, you're good.
I gotta sleep more.
You're
I'm
good.
exhausted. Okay, fights for broader civil rights. Thank you. And both of you guys have been vocal in challenging censorship in different ways.
Well,
Destiny
I'm a free
Online.
speech absolutist.
You're a free speech absolutist. What about you, Destiny? Are you a free speech? Are you a free speech absolutist?
I don't know what that means. In general, I'm like
That
a pretty
means-
big proponent of free speech, but like I think obviously you shouldn't be able to post like criminal threats. You shouldn't be able to post like child sexual material. You should be able to post. I think there are reasonable limitations on speech in different online platforms. So it just depends on what you mean by that.
Right. Well, the Supreme Court has been unanimous on this issue. The exceptions to free speech are threats of immediate violence, defamation. There are 4 exceptions to absolute free speech. I'm okay with those. But other than that, I'm an absolutist on free speech. I believe that the First Amendment means what it says. The Supreme Court agrees with me. I also believe that the Sixth Amendment means what it says. The right of a lawyer to represent a client zealously within the bounds of the law. I have my own view of where those bounds are. I believe my views are accurate.
And both of you care about civil liberties, right? So Harvey, you have a history of defending freedoms of the legal system, and
I spent 30
That's
years on the
30
board
years.
of the ACLU of Massachusetts, 2 of those years as the board president, and I co-founded FIRE, which is even more absolutist than the ACLU. I believe this stuff. I have a long track record.
I'm
Destiny,
curious,
what-
do you have an opinion on the Dominion versus Fox News lawsuit? Did you go through any of that, or?
Well, what is that? That has nothing to do with free speech, does it?
Well, I mean, it was a defamation case having to do with how Fox News was reporting on Sidney Powell's claims relating to the Dominion voting machines.
Well, I haven't studied that case.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I was curious.
Destiny, what are your thoughts on the issue?
You're
with
talking
speech?
about that's commercial defamation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was involving companies, yeah.
Yeah.
Destiny, what are your thoughts on free speech today? Do we need more of it? Is it too much of it? What are the issues with where you see censorship coming in?
I think the issue right now relating to free speech is none of it really has to do with the Constitution or the law at the moment. I think the issue is that the main controllers of free speech are kind of like these huge social media platforms that are private companies. So I think we're kind of in a weird world where it's very difficult to address how it should even look, because some people will take the First Amendment and try to apply it to private corporation. It doesn't really work. But like private corporations are obviously holding on to a great deal of our ability to speak right now. Yeah.
I think that Destiny, by the way, has touched upon one of the premier free speech issues of our era, and that is the fact that so many of the vehicles that carry speech, which we used to call common carriers, are privately owned, and they're therefore not easily subject to the First Amendment. It's a huge challenge. Facebook and Twitter, and huge challenge. Twitter, Elon Musk controls a huge amount of the communication in this country, and yet he's a private citizen, he's a private company, and he can do what he wants. But I think that this is a real problem, because it's no longer, used to be that public utilities had this kind of power. Now they could be sued under the Constitution. Private, Facebook and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are private citizens, and we're going through a lot of soul searching, national soul searching now to figure out how to deal with this new landscape. It's a real problem.
Yeah, like theoretically, like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, well, just those two guys could get in a room and they could decide that they want to, tomorrow censor all liberals or censor all conservatives, and I don't know if there would be any legal ramifications for that. They'd have to go in front of Congress and I guess fight with people a lot. Maybe Congress would make laws, but right now there's nothing on the books to control that, and that's pretty scary, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
What do we do?
Huge
What do we
problem.
do? What needs to be done?
Well, this is being debated now. I have mixed views about it. As a civil libertarian, I don't want to see the government controlling private companies like this. But on the other hand, I am irked at the concentration of this kind of power in the hands of the individual multi-billionaires. I would hope that eventually it would be solved by a multiplicity of these moguls who don't all agree with it, with one another. But I don't know how it's gonna shake out. Private owners of what used to be public utilities. I did quite a bit of litigation on this before Facebook and before Twitter, which I prevailed in, because public utilities were regulated by the federal government, AT&T. But you need me? Okay. Were regulated, but Musk and Zuckerberg were not regulated, and they have an enormous amount of power.
Yeah, so we'll have to regulate them. Destiny, what do you think are the biggest issues right now with the Republican Party? Republicans. I mean, I know you're a pretty hardcore Republican yourself, so I don't know. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I think that the country kind of survives on basically a relatively informed public, and then institutions that can kind of disperse power and maintain some kind of like trusted social order, through the people acting in them. And I think that the conservative movement has undermined and worked to undermine a lot all of those third-party institutions, and I think that's really scary.
Can I respond to the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I am dismayed at the trajectory of both major political parties. I think that the Republican Party has taken on some fascistic, far-right characteristics. I think the Democratic Party, which used to be liberal, has been taken over by progressives. And civil liberties doesn't count very much among fascists or progressives. I used to be a Democrat, and I am now a registered libertarian. I am not happy with either major political party.
Do you agree, Destiny, with the issues that Harvey said about the left, the Democrats?
I think there are issues with progressives. I don't think they've taken over the Democratic Party. I think that they're pretty common in like schools for sure. But I think that the Democratic Party, holistically, is still pretty center left. Like if you go to Congress, you're not going to find a bunch of progressives in Congress that are trying to shut down, civil liberties or free speech. You're going to find the crazier people on like college campuses, basically.
Can I raise another issue?
Go for it. Yeah.
I was very upset when Biden pulled out of the race, which was predicted. It was obvious. In that debate with Trump, it was perfectly obvious he was going to have to pull out. He should have pulled out the next day. Instead, he went weeks and weeks. And Kamala Harris was anointed the candidate. This was a tremendous opportunity for democracy to perform. The Democratic convention should have been an open convention where anybody wanting to vie for the nomination should have been able to do that. Instead, it was a coronation. I was very upset by that. And I thought it showed a weakness in the party. The word political bosses is sometimes overused, but it did seem to me that the bosses were in full power at that convention. And, the coronation was immediately decided upon. And there was a great opportunity for an open debate and the Democratic Party has some great candidates who would have, if there was an open convention, I bet you would have had 3 or 4 fabulous candidates who would have contested the nomination with Kamala Harris, and the better man or woman would have won. So I'm upset with the process.
I think that choosing Kamala Harris was good for legal reasons in terms of how the funds could be spent from the campaign. This was the Biden-Harris campaign that raised the money, so that simplified that process. I think that Harris was on the Biden ticket. Biden-Harris is who we voted for. Biden-Harris was the ticket running, so it makes sense that she would step up next. In terms of having an open convention versus letting it flow through to Harris, you could have, but it's already incredibly chaotic that Biden, is stepping down so shortly before the election. The idea of also throwing us into an open convention past that, I think is just so much risk. I think that, they're still following the delegate process. Like theoretically, Biden could have died, and if Biden dies, the delegates pledge, Harris if they want. There's not like it doesn't have to be an open convention afterwards. So I think the process strategically, I think was followed well. An open convention wouldn't have been good strategically, and by the letter of the process, they followed everything they were supposed to, so I'm okay with how it turned out.
Well, what Harvey's saying is that people would have benefited by a more open coronation, right? Right, Harvey?
Yes, exactly.
What do you think about that, Destiny?
Absolutely not. I think that there are people who don't like a center-left candidate. There are people who wanted a candidate that was much further left, and those are the people that were usually screaming for an open convention. So like the Young Turks, Jimmy Dore, a lot of people that maybe won't even vote Harris anyway, or we're all saying there needs to be an open convention. These people were never voting for any center-left Democrat. They all wanted like a Bernie Sanders-esque figure or somebody like that to step in. I didn't hear a bunch of Gavin Newsom supporters saying we need an open convention. It seemed to be all far-left people, but maybe that's just the media bubble I'm in. I don't know.
I'm interested in what Destiny thinks about whether we need more than two major political parties.
Okay, hold on. Just as a quick thing, I blame Jake for doing this. Okay, my name is Steven.
You don't go by Destiny on.
No, when I do apologize, no, I'm Steven. I used to be a pro gamer. Destiny. Yeah, call me Steven. Yeah, no, you're good.
Sorry, man.
No, you're fine.
Okay,
You're fine.
You should blame me. Yeah.
No, you're good.
Oh wait, hold on. Don't you? If I see you on Piers Morgan, don't they say Destiny?
It's just because that's what my YouTube channel is still named or whatever. But I try to go by Steven. Yeah.
Got it. No, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I think the two-party system is okay. I think that there are other ways to do it, but I think you would have to fundamentally alter the legislature to do it because we don't do like coalition governments. We don't have a parliament. We do the election by popular vote. I think you would have to change a lot of the infrastructure in the United States in terms of how we vote and how we do parties in Congress in order to have more than two parties. Because right now it seems like the only thing a third party can ever do is spoil, which is not good, obviously, if you're part of that party. Yeah.
So there you go. What do you think about that, Harvey?
I think reasonable minds can disagree. I don't expect there to be much change in this.
What do you think we should have, Harvey?
With regard to what?
With regard to the party system.
I think we're better off with four parties. A progressive party, a liberal party, a conservative party, and a fascist party. We do have fascists in this country. And they should be identified. They should self-identify by joining a party of the far right.
So, Stephen, and any other questions for Harvey? Things you wanted to get off your chest or ask about?
How do you think generally the behavior was of everybody involved with the college protests? Do you think that the schools handled themselves well? Do you think they were respectful enough of the college protesters' rights? Do you think the protesters were taking things too far? For the Palestinian, the pro-Palestinian protest? I'm just curious.
I think that college administrators have to be like judges in this respect. They have to maintain complete political neutrality. And, I'm most familiar, because I live in Cambridge, with Harvard and MIT. And Harvard finally has a president and a provost who have adopted the Chicago principles of political neutrality. Harvard no longer has a foreign or domestic policy. It is a campus where these issues are debated freely and individuals are entitled to make up their own minds. But they don't show up at congressional hearings and pronounce, oh, Harvard believes this on this political issue. Harvard is made up of people who would barely sit with each other in a cafeteria, much less agree on a political issue. And finally, President Garber and Provost Manning have announced political neutrality. And with regard to student demonstrations, I think the Supreme Court has been very clear on the line between a permissible and an impermissible demonstration. You cannot disrupt classes. It's sort of like, Boston had this controversy recently because there were demonstrations outside the home of Mayor Wu. And the lines have been drawn by the Supreme Court very clearly. You can have a noisy demonstration during the day. You can't have it at 3 o'clock in the morning when people are trying to sleep. You can have a noisy demonstration out in the central square of the town, but you can't have it outside of an old age home or a hospital. The Supreme Court has been very good on free speech. This is true of liberal courts and conservative courts. One of the few things that the current conservative Supreme Court agrees with the prior liberal Supreme Court on, they get unanimous decisions on the free speech cases. The lines are very clear, and I think that wise college administrators read these decisions and follow them. And it's true now at Harvard, finally, after a lot of turbulence.
I'm curious, one more question. What do you think about the structure of the Supreme Court in, like, say, putting term limits on so each president gets one nomination, or expanding or shrinking the court, or whatever? People talk about this. How do you feel about the current institution of the Supreme Court?
I wouldn't mind term limits. I would make them long. It solves this problem. There have been examples of justices of the Supreme Court and also federal judges on lower courts who have been senile. And that is a real problem. One of the great justices, one of my judicial heroes, William O. Douglas, stayed on the court too late. So I wouldn't mind having a long term, 16, 20 years, something like that. I think expanding the court smacks too much of what Roosevelt tried to do when he tried to pack the court. It didn't work. It was one of the few. I thought Roosevelt was one of the great presidents in American history, and I'm not alone in that thought. But his attack on the Supreme Court was a blemish in an otherwise superb record. I don't think that packing courts is a good idea in a democracy dedicated to the rule of law.
Do you have any opinions on, like, ethics enforcements, in terms of, like, Supreme Court justices accepting gifts or anything like that? Do you think that?
Yeah. You have just touched upon an incredibly difficult issue, because some of the stuff done by Justice Thomas, for example, is appalling judgment, accepting expensive trips and gifts from very wealthy friends, appalling. The question is, in a system of separation of powers, can Congress establish ethical boundaries, or does the court have to do it itself? I think probably Congress can do it. I don't think, but, and here's the catch, ultimately the question of whether Congress can do that was up to the Supreme Court, because it's the Supreme Court. So you need a constitutional amendment to change that, and I'm very nervous about fiddling with the Constitution, because God knows what would be done to some of the First Amendment, for example. So basically, I have a feeling we're going to end up kind of plodding along, trying to deal with this, and hoping that front-page newspaper reports embarrass enough of the justices that they don't do stuff like Thomas has done.
Okay. And then one other question, I guess. What do you think is the biggest...
And Destiny, are you going to share your thoughts on these?
I mean, I think.
Sorry, definitely Steven.
Oh no, yeah, you're good,
Sorry.
Steven. Yeah, I
Steven,
mean, yeah, I
Steven.
think I think ethics guidelines are probably incredibly important. Like the whole argument for the Supreme Court lifetime appointment and everything was to keep them politically neutral, so they don't have to run for re-election or make politically advantageous decisions. And it seems like accepting gifts basically destroys the entire concept of that. That if you can donate enough to a Supreme Court justice, maybe he'll rule favorably for you. And especially since the Supreme Court as an institution has no protection of itself, right? It's not the executive, it can't do things, it's not the legislature, it doesn't get voted on by the people. Even if there isn't impropriety happening with the decisions, the perception of impropriety could be enough to destroy the legitimacy of the court, which I think is an issue.
Stephen, do you think Congress can enact ethical guidelines for the Supreme Court, or is that a violation of the separation of powers?
I don't actually know, but the
Neither
idea,
do I.
yeah,
Neither does anybody.
the idea of that happening and then a Supreme Court justice suing Congress because they would, I guess, be the ones that would have the standing to do it, and or something, and then they would be in front of their own colleagues at the Supreme Court. That would be very interesting. Yeah, I have no idea. Final question, I guess, or just for me, just something I'm curious about. What do you think right now is the greatest threat to the capital F freedom that we have in the United States? What do you think right now are like one or two of the biggest things that Americans, you wish they would kept in mind more, or that should be kept in mind in terms of threats to our freedom right now?
Well, that's a very good question, and my answer may surprise you. I think it is the level of divisiveness and vituperation that has been shown in discussing issues in this country. I'm 82 years old. I've been through the Vietnam War protesting. I was born during the Second World War when we were incarcerating Japanese just for being Japanese. We've had some threats. We've had the McCarthy period. I was a young kid when that happened. But I think that the extreme divisiveness and is it too strong a word to use? The hatred shown by American citizens against other American citizens simply for disagreeing politically is very dangerous, and to me it's very disturbing. I think that civil discussion